This podcast is brought to you by Villanova University on iTunes U. Please visit us on itunes.villanova.edu.
Okay, I started on the executive committee. My first meeting was in May of 2013, I think. It seems like it was a long time ago, but I think this is still my first 3-year term. But the state organization was not doing as much when I started as it is now. And their biggest thing seemed to be to get together 4 times a year at Ludwig's and have a big meal and talk about all the bad things that were going on at their universities and then sort of disperse. It wasn't quite that bad, but almost. And then one of the first things that happened was they decided that they really could not afford to pay to get everybody together 4 times a year because of travel costs, hotels, and everything. So we started to meet by phone 3 times a year, and then that gave us more money to do other things. And so then, what do we want to do with this money? And chapter building was a big one. So just in the last few years, I've seen a big transformation of the executive committee and its focus. And so I do think that we're in a really good place, and I think that, if we can harness more energy from people, that we will just move forward, and that will be good. And so mostly what I'm supposed to talk about is Summer Institute, and I do have, this ever shows up, there is a link, and I don't know if any of you have gone to AAUP website, but they do now have a slideshow of all kinds of pictures from the Summer Institute. There's quite a few people from the Pennsylvania contingent who are there who show up in various of these pictures. And it just sort of gives you a flavor of, and so there's the link. So it gives you a flavor of what Summer Institute's like if you've never been there. And so since we would like to recruit some people from Pennsylvania to go next year, it might be worthwhile just to go and take a look and to talk to some of us who are there. So we had a large number of people from Pennsylvania. There were at least 15, and I did not count the retirees from Holy Family. So this was as many as I counted. So there were 2 of us from the state AAUP Executive Council, Tim and myself. We had 8 people from the 3 AAUP collective bargaining units. 5 were at non-unionized Catholic colleges, and 2 are from private, non-affiliated, non-unionized colleges. And so this is just a note that, University of Scranton is both Catholic and unionized, and I counted them in the unionized ones because they're not having the same issues that the non-unionized Catholic universities are. And so I'm sure that I missed some, but we did have a lot. And so about 8 of us got together for dinner one evening, and some of the initiatives that we're talking about here grew out of the discussions at that dinner. Okay, we saw each other at meals, we saw each other at workshops, but there'd be 2 or 3 people together, and you'd be with people from other institutions. So it didn't really give us a chance to have in-depth conversations about what Pennsylvania needs. And so to me, what came out of this dinner discussion was the most important thing for Pennsylvania that came out of Summer Institute. Each of us got a lot out of our workshops individually to bring back to our institutions, but collectively it was what we talked about at this dinner. And I think that it was also important that it happened kind of towards the end of Summer Institute, where we had an opportunity to talk to a lot of different people and go to several workshops so that we had a fuller idea of what other institutions were doing and what kinds of things we could do. So we talked about the highlights of the Summer Institute and how we could take what we were learning and translate it into strengthening the state AAUP. And we discussed the most critical needs among those institutions that came. So there were representatives from all 3 AAUP collective bargaining chapters there. And even though we are lucky in being unionized and it gives us more money than the than the chapters that aren't a collective bargaining chapter, and we have the strength of the state labor laws behind us, which can be important. Each of us are having our own individual problems, and Lincoln is cropping up with a new one every day, and I mean, I found out a couple more yesterday, and I'm on sabbatical, and so I'm not really dealing with those. I just get text messages and emails, and so right now we're just trying to sort out how many unfair labor practices we want to take. Okay, so so there are problems in those collective bargaining chapters, but the more important thing that was there was that there were people there from the Catholic colleges in the Northeast, Marywood and Misericordia and King's, and so they discussed forming a coalition to strengthen their impact, and we're going to hear more about that. And then for Rosemont, Immaculata, Gwinnett Mercy, the schools that are a little farther east, okay, this may be a good model for you to use. And so we're going to hear more about that. We also this is where we also realized that we really need to get more people from Pennsylvania there. This was something that we brought back to the executive committee, and as John said, we want to spend some money to send more people there from other schools that haven't been there. The other main idea that came out was this idea of these state workshops that is on the business agenda. We found the workshops to be extremely informative, and to give us information and help us think about things in ways that we hadn't thought about them before. So why not take those to the state? And so, okay, I've already talked about, one of the things I want to point out about the Catholic Initiative is that the state AUP has been working on a Catholic Initiative that Tim started about 3 years ago.
About 3 years.
And so he did he's done a lot of research into Catholic thinking and, kind of written a position paper and found some ways that we can move forward. And partly having the meeting here at Catholic Institute is part of that. And so when we see all these Catholic institutions in crisis around Pennsylvania and coming to state AUP for some help, because of an initiative that was started before we heard from all of you, we're in a position to better help you address your needs. And so I think it's just really important for others who are here and from other types of institutions, if you have particular needs, let the state executive committee know so that we can start building that groundwork to move to where we are with the Catholic College. So these were the 3 basic chapters. I know I'm kind of switching gears. I'm being a bad teacher here. How to start a local chapter, utilizing financial documents, and building momentum within a chapter. We have the state, I say we, but this hasn't been me, has gone to some of the schools and helped them start chapters. I think if we eventually do a workshop on that and get more people around the state trained in that this may help to get more chapters started. But the bigger problem is building the momentum once you have them. And then also, administrations always use financial reasons as reasons why they can't pay you and to kind of beat you down and give you more work, which affects building momentum within a chapter. So these two are often tied. So there were a lot of financial workshops at the Summer Institute. So this is another initiative the state's going to undertake and there'll be more discussion of this, is how to build expertise within the state and bring workshops around the state to schools that need particular ones, and focus just on a couple of workshops right now, and then as these get off the ground and they get and become a little bit more routine, we can add additional ones if needed. And I'm the person who's supposed to be communicating with collective bargaining chapters, and I will admit I've been very bad about that. But I do know, like I said earlier, that they are somewhat in crisis, particularly Delaware Valley. University of Scranton I never hear from, even when I email them, so I think maybe they're doing okay, or maybe they are doing so badly they don't even want to talk to anybody. I'm not sure which. So this is something that I need to do a better job of, and kind of build a coalition of people from collective bargaining chapters, because I think that there are some things, not only that collective bargaining chapters have to do that are different than the non-chapters, but there may be some things that we can bring to other institutions to help in organizing, and particularly if there are some that are thinking about becoming unionized, you have a resource in some existing chapters. And we need to leverage that more. And so that's something that I personally need to work on, but if anybody here wants to help me with it, I'll be happy to have some help. And again, that thing of, we really need to get the collective bargaining chapters together came out of Summer Institute, or was sort of strengthened there. So the take-home message from all of this is that having a large number of Pennsylvanians attending Summer Institute, meeting together, has been really important in giving the state AUP a focus and helping us find ways to move forward from where we were. And that these workshops, which are one of the main things, I think will really help each of the chapters in moving forward, and that we are committed to supporting state faculty to attend, so plan on coming to Summer Institute 2016, and we have no idea where that will be. But anyway, does anybody have any questions, comments? No? Okay. Yes.
I'm wondering, and this could be for you or for anybody in the room who feels capable or wants to answer, about, you mentioned the collective bargaining units. When unions such as SEIU are organizing on campuses, is the AAUP attempting to work with them? At that point, does it become a sort of competition? How does that work? I'm wondering if people may have experience with that in the room.
The AAUP has a long-standing organizing, I don't know what the memorandum of understanding is between it and the AFT. So that's the union. So when you hear about, by and large, if you hear about like the University of Oregon organizing through the AAUP, it's also through the AFT. There's more, the SEIU, Steelworkers, AFT, I can't remember anyone. What's that? UAW. But there's at least some national labor organizations are organizing regional unions, or trying to organize, like SEIU for sure. So AFT in Philadelphia, Steelworkers in Pittsburgh. I would say by and large, the AAUP has been left out of those discussions. And I think that's largely because they're seen as not relevant, or they're not as big. So I think, and what the way I've thought about it is I would much rather have somebody organized in any union. I don't care if it's the Boilermakers. I think that would put them in a better situation than what we have at present. But I also think the AAUP as a union, as an organization, is extremely democratic. It's member-run, and it's decentralized, so that every, and that sounds like, well, that's what every union is. And as I was trying to say, that is not the case, right? So I think there's a real value in having, in this field, in being part of an organization that's made up of people only in the field of higher education. So this will play out, but to some extent, that's kind of what's going on in western Pennsylvania. There's a bit of a dust-up over the jurisdictional issues. Sorry, there was another question.
I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time. I'm sorry we came late. We represent Arcadia University, and about 20 years ago or so, Arcadia we were then Beaver College, had a very strong AAUP chapter. And we were on the brink of going to collective bargaining when the yeshiva decision came down. And that took the wind out of our sails, absolutely. And ever since then, the chapter has sort of declined and declined. And about 5 years ago, it just collapsed entirely. And now we're in the process of trying to reinvent it or bring it back. So my understanding is that I hadn't been involved in these issues for 20 years. So what has happened to the yeshiva decision? The yeshiva decision was understood at that time to say that if faculty were involved in any way in administration, then you could not unionize. Yet I see that there are collective bargaining institutions across the country. How can that be?
There's been more union activity since yeshiva than before. And so sometimes what you have is at institutions, and I can't remember if Del Valle was in this situation. I'm pretty sure they organized after their private organization. The yeshiva decision would account. But often what you find is things get so jammed up, and there's such a breakdown that college presidents or university presidents say, you know what, it would be so much clearer for both sides if we had a union contract, because then there would be no ambiguity about what is or isn't the policy. It's handled through a collective bargaining process. So that's part of why you have private collective bargaining organizations, of which we have two. And then my reading of the tea leaves is that I think the National Labor Relations Board is whittling away at yeshiva. Right. The question is, it also has to go up through the federal court system and to the Supreme Court, and I don't think there's much doubt that this court would basically uphold the yeshiva. But I think in terms of a lot of there's what was it, Lutheran. Pacific Lutheran is a pretty good indication that some of the objections on religious grounds or yeshiva grounds, that they're really, if you're at an institution that basically doesn't have shared governance, the National Labor Relations Board is starting to say, well, yeah, no, this is, the understanding of yeshiva was in a different time, and things have really evolved in the last 40 years, and faculty don't really have the kind of power that the courts thought they did in 1973.
But you're saying that at the moment we do not have the power to force collective bargaining.
Right. You do not have the ability to act within the National Labor Relations Act if you're in a private institution. You can engage in concerted activities, so you're protected under that. That doesn't often do you that much good. It doesn't prohibit you from having a union agreement. It just prohibits you from using the National Labor Relations Act. Part-time faculty or non-tenure track faculty, totally different situation. So if there's no tenure system or not much of one, you know, it's much easier. You can use the Act.
I spoke with the Pennsylvania NLRB, I don't remember, post-Pacific Lutheran decision.
Right.
And what they told me was that because of this decision that at Pacific Lutheran that overturned the yeshiva decision, that they are using the criteria that came out of that to evaluate whether or not university faculty can organize. And the window now is that they can until it's appealed and overturned. So at this moment, NLRB would work with someone, would work with faculty to create a union.
Could you say what the Pacific Lutheran decision is?
They challenged the ability to form a union, and it was upheld in the court there, or yeshiva was overturned for them, is my understanding.
It wasn't right. It wasn't exactly that they overturned yeshiva, but they said that the college said we're a religious organization, so we can't be covered even if we were just talking about non-tenure track faculty or part-timers, because we're a religious organization. And the NLRB said, so these are people all teaching Catholic doctrine? And they said, no. And they said, all right, so bullshit. They can organize. And so I think the National Labor Relations Board is much friendlier. I still think, though, that this is what I remember about the National Labor Relations Act, that if you're at a private institution, you're covered under the Act. If you're at a public or quasi-public institution like Lincoln, you're covered under state law. thing.
And you're saying that if we didn't have tenure at the institution, we would be in a better position.
In terms of collective bargaining, yes. Yeah, if you're
Is that
going to
a
be
threat
forced.
we can use?
What's that?
Is that a threat we can use? That is, if we go to the administration and say, supposing we're willing to get our members to give up tenure in order to have a really strong union. Do you want to face a really strong union?
I wouldn't advise it, because I think most people wouldn't go for that. And I'm not sure you would. You'd have to have the
Then they
union
can fire
before.
you. Then
Sorry,
they can
Matt?
fire you if they're not paying.
I just had a question. If you had a union contract.
They can still fire you. It didn't take time to do that. And in the interim, they might, fire you.
It sounds like when the rubber hits the road, if you are working in a university that is a culture that is either devoid of a good understanding of collective bargaining, or if there's a culture in the administration that is opposed to it, you have really no leverage whatsoever. I mean, first of all, even if things are challenged, you're going to need some kind of law representation, because it's going to get challenged through the courts. Where's that going to come from? You're up for a fight. And I've been in unions most of my working life, both labor and academic.
Right.
Taught at Temple University, I was with the AFT, or the version of the AFT there. And I was stunned by the fact they were asking me to be more active in the union, and I asked them, we were up for a big contract, are you willing to strike? And they said no. And I said, well, where is your leverage? And it was one of the worst contracts ever. Out of the whole faculty, I was one of 8 people who voted against it. 8 out of the entire Temple University faculty for that contract. See, what do you do when you're up against a culture that doesn't really, because see, we have this ambiguity. Professionals, union. There's usually been like a philosophical divide between that. And even a tension when you have like, Ask Me, or people who work where you have a blue-collar union and a white-collar union together. They're always divided.
Right.
So, I mean, this notion of fighting and having some substance out of which you can carry on the fight, that's the real question for people who are going to organize.
It's worth remembering that the basis for American labor law goes back to the English Masters and Servants Act. So that should give you some idea of the fundamental dynamic. So it's a long way around of saying labor law tends not to be our friend. But people formed labor organizations before there was the National Labor Relations Act. In some ways, they were stronger unions before the National Labor Relations Act.
A lot of violence happened with that. Yes.
But I would say that we have a lot more power collectively than we know how to access outside. I mean, so I've got nothing against unions. I think they would be great. I'd love to see they really, I mean, unions like Lincoln strengthen the process. But I'm going to take 2 more quick questions, or 3, and then, or comments or questions. And then
I was just curious. I think Scranton's union predated you, right? And there's a number of ones that did. I was just wondering how many sorts of things.
I'm pretty sure Del Valle came after Yeshiva. I don't know about Lincoln.
Lincoln came in 72, so that was the year before you.
Yes.
Jacob?
To your question about, I think one of the big things that I think is important to keep in mind is that as the numbers or the percentage, the ratio of part-time adjuncts and non-tenure full-time faculty increases, those are faculty who typically, especially the part-timers, do not have managerial or administrative duties, so they're clearly outside the purview of yeshiva. And so I think as we see more that ratio go up for part-timers, it becomes easier for them to make a claim that they don't fall under that jurisdiction. But yeah, I would say don't give up the tenure. You've got to keep it.
Rory?
I'll add in, so at Clark College, 40 years ago, so pre-yeshiva, there was discussion about unionizing, and then it petered away. And with we're in our 3rd year with our president right now, and after the Pacific Lutheran decision came down, we approached her very friendly manner. We happened to have a meeting already scheduled, and said, well, the specific Lutheran decision, it talked about the shared governance has to be actual governance that isn't overridden, not just sort of you get input. And so to say that we have shared governance so we couldn't unionize, it is clearly not flying anymore. And the look of shock on her face, and we didn't say anything about unionizing at that point, just the realization that shared governance has to go beyond just sort of an agreement on paper. They actually have to follow through. So even in the absence of going all the way towards unionization, that the wording in the Pacific Lutheran can be very useful in, sort of slipping it into memos.
Do they use the phrase shared government?
They did. And they talk about actual, not meaningful and actual, not sort of. They had a word for like it's there on paper, but it doesn't happen.
But the AEP is called like full government.
Right.
Faculty
Or student
had to-
government. I mean, it's sort of like, is your government's more like a parliament or more like student government? And often it's more like student
So
government.
it's worth going back to that to see if you could like pull out a couple of those key sentences to
Yeah.
brandish about.
And one of them was that the faculty had to have decision-making in the area of financial matters, okay? So it's more than advising, it's actual sharing of decision-making. And I don't know of any faculty that decide how the university spends its money. It makes recommendations, but ultimately those decisions are made by the board, top administrators, etc. So that was a very key sentence in what came out of that ruling. And I think on the basis of that, almost any of us has the capability to unionize. Because, as I said, I don't think any faculty can decide how the university is going to spend its money.
Well, is there a clear implication, I'm sorry to pursue this for a moment, but is there a clear implication in that decision that shared governance is an expectation of academic institutions? Is there a court judgment in that respect?
It doesn't require shared governance. It's just a way of saying if you don't have real shared governance, then it's kind of suspect to say that, oh, these people are managers, and so they're not employees of the national board. So it's just that that ruling hasn't really gone through the courts. That's why from what I heard from the AEP, they're saying, we want to see how that plays out, and it's not at all clear that that's going to play out.
Just one thing, I think I'm remembering this correctly, but the burden of proof that you are a manager, in some sense, is on the institution to provide. I think that, so that if you claim, no, we don't have meaningful role in shared governance, and the institution says, oh, they are managers, then the institution is the one that has to show that you are. It's just a different...
I would still, and we're going to hear from Brooke for a second and then back to you, but the other thing I would say, even if you were going to engage in collective bargaining, or you wanted to do that, the first thing that anybody, SEIU, Boilermakers, Teamsters, are going to say is, how many people on campus can you get to the first meeting? And if the answer is 2, they're going to say, get back to me when the answer is, 13 or 25. And so it still doesn't get around the fact, union or no, we need an organization. You need a culture of participation. You need to kind of change people's expectations.